Okay. Now I know where we are. Here we go. Good Shabbos, everyone. Forgot about that. Okay. Here we go. Okay, here we go. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asod et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asod et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Beini u'ben b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam oti le'olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asod et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asod et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi shavat vaynafash shavat vaynafash v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asod et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. Okay, and blessing for study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, good Shabbos, everyone. I'm glad some of you are not yet on the ski slopes, so that we can have class today. For those of you who are already in Colorado, hope you're up and watching from home. Our Torah portion this week is called Vayigash. And we're coming to the end of the book of Genesis and the end of the Joseph narrative, which is one of my most favorite parts of the Torah, and the drama of him revealing of Joseph revealing himself to his brothers is really spectacular, and there's just a lot going on here. And so today I want to look at a couple of competing ideas and see how they come together. So you know that whatever happens in Genesis, I mentioned this last night, and we've talked about it many times in this class, that what Genesis is what the rabbis call Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim. Right? What happens to the forefathers and foremothers is like a sign for the future of the Jewish people, and that in many ways Genesis is the microcosm of what's going to happen. So when we say, for example, the tribe of Levi, or the character Levi, it's a sign for the Levites going forward for the rest of time. And you see that as well here. It was taught that when God changed Abraham and Sarah's names from Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah, it was then forbidden to ever call them Abram and Sarai again. They needed to be called Abraham and Sarah from now on, and they are. But with Jacob, you don't see that. When when his name is changed to Israel, sometimes he's still called Jacob and sometimes he's still called Israel. And it depends. I mean, the rabbis point out that if it's referring to Jacob individually, it's one name. If it's referring to him as the father of all of the Jewish people, it's referred to him a different way, and so forth. So there's a lot going on that has tremendous implications for what's going to happen into the future and perhaps even to today and going forward. Now, one of the things that we see about Joseph, and a lot of rabbis talk about this when they're studying Joseph and his character, is that he cries a lot. There are a lot of times where he has tears. And what I want to look today, probably everybody cries at different points in their life, but with Joseph, the Torah records it. So other people may have cried a lot too, but it's not recorded in the Torah. With Joseph, we have a few different instances where he's crying. But what's interesting about that is he doesn't cry when you might expect. He cries at emotional moments, but he doesn't cry at like other things, like, when he gets thrown into a pit with snakes and scorpions, or when his brothers decide to kill him, or when they change their mind but just sell him into slavery, or when he gets sold as a slave, or when he gets sent to jail, or when they forget about him and he gets left in a dungeon. None of those times does he cry. But you want to talk about it? Be my guest.
We're going to cry now.
Please.
Okay. One of the things in studying about Joseph and his reconciliation with his family is the time it took him and the circumstances in which he offered to reconcile with his family. And we rarely talk about that, but that in itself is a lesson that you can take a risk, and if you're willing to take the risk, it's never too late to attempt and succeed in making a reconciliation. And I think in our ordinary life, that's a critical point, and rarely do we talk about it.
Okay. So, if that's something anyone wants to talk about, we can talk about that too. What I'm interested in is to figure out why Joseph cries when he cries, and why he doesn't cry when he doesn't cry, or at least the Torah doesn't record why he doesn't cry when he doesn't cry. But the implications that has going forward, as I was saying before, that perhaps the tears represent not something that is happening in his life, because when something really bad happens in his life, he's not crying. But when he is crying, perhaps it represents something greater that's going to happen to the Jewish people in the future. Now, if you're one of those JEPD people, if you like that stuff, if you like the documentary hypothesis that the Torah was written much later, then you're going to love this stuff. Because if you believe that the Torah was recorded much later on, in the times of ancient Israel, in the times of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, and if you're going back maybe 2,700 years instead of 3,500 years when Moses may have lived, then what you're saying is, of course he's talking about stuff that's happening in the future, because we're writing this in the future. And we're writing about what's happening now. So, people who believe in the documentary hypothesis that the Torah was written much later by people and not by, Moses on Mount Sinai as God told him. You know what you call that class of people who believes that stuff? Scholars or Reform and conservative rabbis. That's general. And then the people that they teach. So you may or may not believe that. But if you do believe that, then this makes sense. Because if you're saying what Jacob's tears represent what's going to happen in the future, and you're living in the future and you're writing down what's happening in your day, of course it flows better. So if you don't believe that, if you believe in the tradition, like, you know who believes in the Torah the way it's written? Orthodox Jews and radical Reform rabbis. Like radical Reform rabbis. So, like me. Okay, yeah, Danielle.
Why are you saying documentary hypotheses? I don't understand the term.
Documentary hypothesis is the belief that developed in the 1800s on which the Reform movement, and to many extent the conservative movement, is based on, that the Torah was not written by Moses on Mount Sinai, but because of scientific, archaeological, and literary discoveries within the Torah. If you have another question, like a follow-up question, now you have the mic. But if you just want the answer to this question, you don't need it. So,
What is JE?
okay. So those people who believe in the documentary hypothesis, which was a scholarship that was developed by actually an anti-Semitic scholar named Julius Wellhausen in Germany, I think in the 1840s or 1830s, something like that, said that the Torah was written by different people at different times, and that it was written by different schools of thought, and it was written much, much later than when Moses would have existed. And so what they generally date their writing of the Torah to is like 2,700 years ago, whereas Moses lived about 800 years before that. So it would have been much, much later. And so they say different parts were, and they have different classes. J represents the name of God that, that starts with a J that you're not supposed to say. And the E source represents the Elohim, and P represents the priestly class and what they were writing, and D represents Deuteronomy, which was also written by Isaiah. Basically it's the belief that the Torah was written much, much later, and through scientific study of the Torah, that's how they come to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Carol?
I believe if man wrote this Torah, a lot of things would not be in it.
Okay.
I mean, Abraham wouldn't have said she's his sister. David wouldn't have messed up. There's a lot of things in this Torah that if it was built by any input of man's own idea and own will, there's so many things that would not be in here.
Okay, so if you are looking to start a JEPD club at Temple Beth Ham, don't call Carol. She doesn't want to hear it. All right, we've established that. Okay. All right, Lenore.
Well, you know, by the time of Ezra, we have according to the book of Ezra, where he's reading the Torah, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. We do know that according to the book of Ezra, we have the process of reading the Torah, okay? So that's like 444 BCE. And we do have this information from the period of the time of Josiah when they find, quote, the last book of Deuteronomy. I was trained in JP, whatever, JEP, etc., as well at HUC. And I don't think we can discount it completely. I think that there is some validity to talking about the fact that there are those who believe it came at the time of Moses, but there's nothing wrong with thinking that the accumulated wisdom was handed down and written maybe when they finally got into the kingdoms.
Yeah, look, there are scholars on both sides of the argument. My feeling is I don't care what you believe. Believe whatever you want. As long as you recognize that the Torah has good stuff in it to teach us how to be Jews, I'm good. Now, if you want to know what the right answer is, I can tell you that privately. But No, but everybody, you can believe what you want. It makes you no difference. I was just pointing out that if you're a fan of the JEPD, then you'll like the idea of Ma'aseh Avot Simon Labanim. By the way, there's a good book that summarizes the documentary hypothesis called "Who Wrote the Bible." I forget the author, but if you go to Amazon and just get "Who Wrote the Bible," at the very end it tells you who it was. Who it was. Just to spoil, it was actually a guy named Morris Finkelstein. So, no, I'm just kidding.
There are Jews who disagree about things?
Yeah, right. So, okay. Now, let's start. We don't have Norman. I just recognized him. He has a cold. Okay. All right. He's skiing in Colorado. No. All right. So, Edith, would you mind? We're going to begin today. We have a couple minutes left. We're going to begin with chapter 45 of Genesis. That's this week's Torah portion, which is called Vayigash. Chapter 45, verse 1. Chapter 45, verse 1. Okay.
Joseph could no longer restrain himself before all who were standing in attendance on him, so he cried, "Send everyone away from me," so that no one else was there when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He gave voice to a loud wail, and the Egyptians heard. Pharaoh's palace heard. Joseph then said
Okay, so, if you're keeping score at home, in this chapter, there are other sections we're going to look at, but you see in verse 2, he's crying. Okay, and this is a common theme with Joseph, and it's very interesting to see when he's crying and when he is not crying. But here you see, and it actually uses the modern word bechi, which means to cry. Livkot is the infinitive in Hebrew, to cry. So we have that in verse 2. Okay, let's keep going.
Joseph then said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father really alive?" But his brothers were unable to answer him. They recoiled in fear of him. Joseph then went on to say to his brothers, "Come, draw near to me," so that they drew near. He said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold to Egypt. And now don't be troubled, don't be chagrined, because you sold me here. For it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you."
Right. Now, what would you have paid to see the look on the brothers' faces when they find out that this is Joseph? I mean, one of the great moments in human history.
Shocking.
So, okay, let's keep going.
There have already been 2 years of famine in the land, and there remain 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. So God sent me ahead of you to assure your survival in the land and to keep you alive for a great deliverance. So it's not you who sent me here, but the God who made me a father to Pharaoh, a lord of all his household, a ruler of the whole land of Egypt. Hurry back up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me a lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near me, you, your children, and your children's children, your flocks and herds, and all that you own.'"
Okay, so Goshen, not Goshen, Indiana. It's a real place. But Goshen, on the off chance you were here last night and paying attention and remember what I was talking about, we mentioned Goshen here in Genesis, that Joseph tells his brothers, and this again is another example of Ma'aseh Avot Simon Labanim, something that happened. So what does that mean? Ma'aseh Avot, something that happens, Avot, to the matriarchs and patriarchs. Simon is a sign, Labanim, for the Jews of the future. Right? In other words, Genesis is a microcosm for what's going to come next. Joseph says to the brothers, you're going to live in Goshen. But what's Goshen in the book of Exodus? Goshen in Genesis is the place where Joseph sends his brothers to live. But what's Goshen in Exodus? Anybody remember?
Where the Jews live.
Which Jews live? The slaves, all of them.
All the slaves.
The slaves. So what's happening now is that we're starting to see foreshadowing of what's going to happen in Exodus, which is to say that a community is being established, a Jewish community, a Jewish city, like Boca, right, is being set up in Egypt. And if I mentioned this also last night, but when Jacob comes to see Joseph, what does he tell Judah? Anybody remember? Go ahead of me. You know, remember? Exactly. I'll come see you in Goshen. Well, that's what he says to Joseph. But what he says to Judah when they're leaving Israel and coming to Egypt to come back and see Joseph is he sends Judah ahead and he says, go and get it ready. And Rashi tells us, what does that mean? Set up Jewish centers. Set up yeshivot. Hillary? JCCs, right. I can talk without the microphone? No, the mic's better. By the way, the point of the mic is so that people at home can hear you. Otherwise, I get emails. All right.
Okay. So this is always I come back to this topic all the time, but it's screaming at me here. And that is, so Joseph basically doesn't blame his brothers because he's saying they didn't have any free will. That this was, I'm a free will, I've got a problem with free will, but that's not my problem because I have no free will. Any rate, he says, God sent me ahead of you. God did this to save you. God, in other words, this wasn't your fault.
Right.
And so now you're saying the people down he's telling them to go to Goshen where the slaves are. And so he probably doesn't have any free will doing that. He's probably doing that because God had said, this is where the Jews have to be to become slaves. So there's like no free will in this story, is there?
No. I don't think that's the case. It is true that one thing leads to another. But if they made different decisions, then other things would have happened. But so they picked Goshen. Why Goshen? Because that was an area where you could be a shepherd. That was a common place for that. And so Joseph, this doesn't come in till later, but Joseph tells the brothers, go be shepherds. Why? They already were. But that job, there's a reason that Joseph gives them. Because that's an abominable job to the Egyptians. The Egyptians don't like that job. And so if you do that job, you're not going to be offending anyone because none of them want to do that job anyway. So he says, go do that. Now, that means that they really have to humble themselves because he's giving them the worst job in all of Egypt. That comes into play later in Exodus because, it's a whole different, this is going to take us into a whole different stuff. But Moses grows up in the palace. And he's an Egyptian. And when he goes out to meet Zipporah, and Zipporah goes to her father Yithro, and says, who protected you from these other guys who were out there bothering you? And Joseph, and Zipporah tells her father, an Egyptian man helped us. Because what did Moses look like? He looked like an average Egyptian who grew up in the palace. He didn't have hands that were dirty like a slave. He wasn't a slave. And so then what happens? He gets married, and he has kids. And what's more humbling than getting married and having kids? And then he becomes a shepherd. And now he's a shepherd, and he goes back to Egypt, and he says to Pharaoh, let my people go. But he doesn't come back to Egypt looking like an Egyptian. He comes back to Egypt looking like what the Jews look like, the people in Goshen, because now he's a shepherd too. And the Christians take this motif as well. They also had a shepherd. So, right. He was Jew, yeah, so he knew. If you want a bad job, be a shepherd. I mean, he also did woodwork, apparently, but wasn't he a carpenter or something? I don't know. Anyway. It's a great thing because he's Jewish, he's from Israel. They're going to worship where he was born, and he was Jewish 2,000 years ago, but the Jews were never there. We're never there. We're never there. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Ken, can we get that microphone back? Hillary, there's a lot more to talk about on free will. I'm constrained to 32 more minutes. So
Number 11, is that we have to?
yeah, where did we get to? About verse 11. That sounds good.
I will sustain you there, for there remain 5 more years of famine, so that you and your household and all that you own are not impoverished. Look, you can see with your own eyes, so can my brother Benjamin, that it's my mouth speaking to you. Tell my father how they honor me in Egypt, and all that you have seen. Hurry up and bring my father down to here. He then fell weeping upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept with them. Only after this could his brothers respond to him.
Okay, so here's another instance of weeping. The first one we saw in verse 2, when he realizes who he's got. And he couldn't take it anymore, right? Verse 1, Joseph could not endure it anymore. He starts weeping. Then verse 14, he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. I just want to jump back with you to a different instance from chapter 42. So I'll just read it. You can jump back if you want. I know it's annoying to have to skip around. But in chapter 42, in last week's Torah portion, Miketz, in verse 24, it says this. Starting with verse 23, actually. Now they did not know that Joseph understood, for the interpreter was between them, right? Because they're speaking Hebrew, and they don't realize that Joseph understands what they're saying. He turned away from them and wept. He returned to them and spoke to them. But then he does something really underrated in the Torah. What do I mean by that? I'm going to explain. But he says he all of a sudden, out of nowhere, takes Simon, Shimon, and throws him in jail. Okay, so this is the third time now that we've seen just this morning of Joseph weeping. The first time was in our Torah portion, chapter 45, verse 2, and then again in verse 14. And here I'm showing you in chapter 42, verse 24, Joseph's weeping again. So if you look on the sheet, a couple of Rashis there from chapter 42, and he turned away from them. So he moved some distance away from them so that they should not see him weeping. Again, he didn't weep. At least he may have, but the Torah doesn't record it. That he didn't weep when they threw him into the pit. And he didn't weep when they sold him into slavery. And he didn't weep when Potiphar bought him. And he didn't weep when Potiphar's wife framed him. And he didn't weep when he was thrown into the dungeon. And he didn't weep when the baker forgot about him and left him there for another 2 years. All those times that are times you might think about crying, he may have, but the Torah doesn't record it. Here, when it comes to his relationship with his brothers and seeing them again, he's weeping a fair bit. Okay, at least 3 times that we've seen so far. So if you look, Rashi says he turned away from them. He moved some distance away so that they should not see him weeping. He didn't want to see the Egyptians, his courtiers. He didn't want them to see him weeping either. And he wept. Why did he weep? Because he heard what they were saying, that they regretted their past conduct to him, which means to say they still remember him. And they feel bad about what they did to him. And that causes him to weep, which is amazing. So maybe he believed that when he was thrown into the dungeon, or when he was thrown into the pit, or when he was sold into slavery, he said, okay, this is what God wants to happen. It's probably going to turn out for the good. Probably I'm going to, save the world, no big deal. Right? Which is what he says to his brothers, which is troubling to anyone who has free will. Although I'll tell you what it does say in the Talmud, and this is a common belief in Judaism, a very famous line in the Talmud. I think we've mentioned it before. Hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim. Anyone ever heard that? Hakol,
Everything is in the hands of heaven except the fear of heaven.
Not too shabby. Okay. Hakol bidei shamayim. Everything's in the hands of the heavens. Chutz miyirat shamayim. With the exception of your own belief in God. Your own belief in God has to be your own decision. But does God control everything else that's happening? Yes. But whether or not you believe that, and whether or not you care about God, or whether or not you want to have a relationship with God, or whether or not you're in awe of God, or whether or not however you make the decisions that you make, that's up to you. That's Jewish theology. Would you mind passing the mic back to Richard? Thank you.
Just a observation. That's the reason Abraham was selected, I think.
Is what?
He placed trust and faith in God.
So I don't know if we said this last week or the week before. It came up that, or maybe it was a different class, but when Abraham and Sarah heard the call of God, it's not that they were the only ones who heard it. It's that they're the only ones who showed up and responded to it. There were other people who knew about the idea. They weren't the first monotheists. Noah was a monotheist. Adam and Eve were monotheists, according to Jewish tradition. King Melchizedek was a monotheist, the king of Salem. But none of them were willing to spread the word, which is an interesting idea. Okay.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, did you just say that the circumstance in which we live is predetermined, but all of our decisions within it and our relationship with God is free?
Well, I think what the Talmud means is that God controls the world, but we control our own decisions.
So is what I said correct? Our circumstance is predetermined, but our decisions within it are free.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the sun's going to come up and go down because that's how God wants it. And he set that in place. There's nothing we can do about that.
But if you oversleep or not, that's on you.
That's up to you.
Yeah.
That's up to you. Yeah. Okay, this is a whole different topic, which is a very interesting topic, but it's just going to take me in a direction that I really do not want to focus on this morning because we have a lot to get to. But let's take one more comment and then move on.
You see a different side of Joseph here. You see a man who grew up from a young man who believed that he controlled the destiny of everybody by interpreting their dreams. And when he realizes that it's not he who's interpreting the dreams, but God, he becomes humble. And it's his humility and his relationship with his brothers that allows him to reconcile.
Very nice. Now, he still has some issues with humility that Moses never had, or that Moses got rid of. And you see that with when Jacob comes and says, I'm not coming to your palace, I'm not interested in your palace. Joseph was interested in himself. He used to look in the mirror and comb his hair and stuff. I used to do that too, when it was an option. Okay. Now, if he cries and he is weeping that because they care about him and they regret what they did to him, his next action is bizarre. What does he do? He takes Simon and throws him in jail. And look what Rashi says about that. By the way, Simon and Simeon are the same person. You can call it whatever you want. In Hebrew, it's Shimon, right? Like Shimon Peres, Shimon. The second son. Reuben was first son of Leah and Jacob. Second son was Simon or Simeon. So he says, he cast him into the pit, and it was he who had said to Levi, behold, this dreamer cometh. Another explanation, it was Joseph's intention to separate him from Levi, for the two of them might conspire to kill him. Now, what do we know about Simon and Levi? Remember when Dinah was raped? Simon and Levi went and killed everybody, all the people of Shechem. So Joseph is afraid when the two of them are together that they can be dangerous and they can be threatening and do bad things. So he says, I'm going to split them up. And so I'm going to take Simon away from Levi. By the way, when they went and killed all of the people, who raped Dinah. I mean, it was only one person who did it, but they went and killed all the men. They were only 13 and 14 years old when they did that, which is pretty, you think of them as older men. They were young. Now, they had their bar mitzvahs, so they were men. But that's why I tell kids on their bar mitzvahs, you still have to go to school. There's still what to be learned. You haven't accomplished everything you need to accomplish pedagogically. So now the rabbis go on to explain, I didn't bring any of the context here or any of the other rabbis, but the rabbis go on to explain that what happened was while the other brothers were there, Simon was thrown into jail. But once the other brothers left, Simon was taken out of jail and put into like a nice place and was treated well, and Joseph bathed his feet and gave him food and treated him with great respect. So he was incarcerated, but it was like when the king of Saudi Arabia arrested all the other rich people of Saudi Arabia and confined them to their suites at the Ritz-Carlton. So wasn't great, but it could have been worse. Could have been worse. Okay, so I just want to point out here that Simon is now that's Talmudic, that's rabbinic, that's later that he was treated well. But the Torah tells us, if you're just going by the Torah, Simon's thrown in jail. And the question is, for how long is he there? Because what happens to the brothers? They go back home. Now, by the time they schlep back home, when they get back home, do they rush back? No. They kind of forget about Simon. So look what happens. Where do I want to go now? Hang on, bear with me. I don't remember. Did I bring the verse? 43. Okay, so if you'll look with me at chapter 43, verse 1. So the brothers go back home. Simon's left behind in jail. The brothers slept back to Israel, however long that took. And then they stay home. And look how, who's got a mic? Anyone have Bill, would you mind reading chapter 43, verse 1?
But the famine in the land was severe. And when they had eaten up the rations which they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again and procure some food for us."
Okay, so they've totally forgotten about Simon. They come back, and they have all this food that they collected, and they eat it all. And however long that took. I mean, they brought as much food as they could bring back. That's why they went to Egypt in the first place. You imagine they tried to get as much food as they possibly could, but the famine wasn't getting any better, and they had finished all of their provisions. So Jacob says, "Guys, we're out of food. I need you to go back down to Egypt and buy more food." Nobody says anything about going back and getting Simon. They've forgotten about him. It's unbelievable. He ends up being in jail for 2 years. There's no urgency to go get him. Isn't that weird? Okay, yeah, I thought so. Okay, let's keep going. Bill, would you mind keep going? Verse 3.
But Judah said to him, "The man warned us, 'Do not let me see your faces unless your brother is with you. If you will let our brother go with us, we will go down and procure food for you. But if you will not let him go, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'Do not let me see your faces unless your brother is with you.' And Israel said, 'Why did you serve me so ill as to tell the man that you had another brother?'"
Right. What is wrong with you? Why would you? So I've got 2 sons that I really love. Why? because I loved Rachel the most. And I had 2 sons with her. Joseph, I lost. Benjamin's the only one I had left. He didn't even go down with you. Why would you tell him? And they said, because we didn't know it was Joseph. And for whatever reason, he kept asking, do you have another brother? He kept pushing us. So finally, we had to tell him. But why now do they not go back ever to get Simon? Because Jacob doesn't want to lose Benjamin. He's okay losing Simon. He may not be okay losing Simon, but he's not willing to risk losing Benjamin to get Simon back. Now, we're a people now who are suffering because our brothers, 129 of our brothers and sisters, are still being held hostage. Right? And the Israeli government has very hard decisions to make. You know, when I was in Denver a few weeks ago at the JNF conference, I had lunch with Michael Oren. You know Michael Oren? So he said, you know, Netanyahu, he's not a fan of Netanyahu. He worked for him as the ambassador to the United States during one of Netanyahu's many terms. But today he speaks very tough about Netanyahu. But he does say Netanyahu now has to make decisions that no human should ever have to make. And so on October 8th, the Israeli government, you know, the leaders got together and said, we lost, 1,400 people. And there's, 300 kidnapped, now, or however, whatever the number was. We got 100 and some back. There's 129 there. A few more were killed in Gaza. Of those 129, we don't know how many are still alive, but whatever. So say there are 300 captives. And the Israeli government said, okay, we've lost 1,400. We're going to lose 300 more, but we're going to destroy Hamas tomorrow. Because we'll poison the tunnels, or we'll, flood the tunnels, or we'll do whatever, and that's what it's going to be. And the Israeli government said, we can't make a decision like that. We'll have to go in with ground forces and do everything we can to save the hostages. Not too many countries would do that. Most countries would say we lost 1,400, it's going to be 1,700, but we're going to win the war quickly. Now, 3 months later, whatever it is, we're still trying to find the hostages. So Jacob has a very interesting decision. I could do everything I can and risk more of my sons to get the one who's hostage back, or I could not risk that and save the ones that I have. These are decisions nobody should ever have to make. It's ironic that it's happening this week's Torah portion as all of this is unfolding. But I've read this my whole life, and it never occurred to me that they pretty much forgot about Simon. It's an amazing thing. Okay. So I just want to jump ahead to verse 10. So Israel, their father, said to them, if it must be so, do this. Take of the land's glory in your vessels and bring it down to the man as a tribute, a bit of balsam, honey, wax, lotus, pistachios, and almond. Okay. So if you look at one commentary, Rabbeinu Bachya, on Genesis 43:10, it says this. According to his rabbi, Rabbeinu Hananiel, the brothers may do with eating as little as possible until their father would raise the subject of a return to Egypt. So they were in no rush to go get Simon either. They didn't eat through their rations so that they had to go back. They bided their time as much as possible. The sons of Jacob were very sensitive in their respect for the feelings of their father and did not browbeat him with their arguments, preferring to wait until Jacob made the first move. Once Jacob had shown his willingness to let Benjamin travel, he also suggested 5 ways to help the trip become successful. First, he prepared a gift for the ruler of such a mighty country. Secondly, he told his sons to return the money which they found in their sacks. It could have been an oversight on the part of the manager in Joseph's household. By the way, you know who the manager, according to the rabbis, was who put the money in their sack? Manasseh, Joseph's son. And Joseph told Menashe, give them their money back. That's Talmudic, but it's interesting. Thirdly, who ended up framing them? Their nephew. Right. Thirdly, he insisted that the money be returned for reasons of establishing their integrity as God-fearing people, even if Joseph had never missed that money. Fourth, he authorized the brother to take Benjamin with him. Fifth and last, he prayed that the Almighty would grant the brothers mercy when they would face the ruler of Egypt. Nobody mentions a thing about doing anything to save Simon, which is incredible. Okay. One more comment there. Rashi says, for compassion was excited. He asked him, have you a brother of the same mother as yourself? He replied, I have a brother, but I know not where he is. Have you sons? He replied, I have 10. Joseph asked him, and what are their names? Benjamin replied. So this is Joseph talking to Benjamin, but Benjamin doesn't know that it's Joseph. Okay, so he says, "Have you a brother?" Meaning he says talking about himself, and he replies, "Yes, I do, but I don't know where he is." Even though I'm looking right at him, right? And he says, "Well, do you have sons?" He said, "I've been prolific. Right? I've got 10." Now, what does he name his 10 sons? This is what Rashi finds so fascinating, and Benjamin replies. The first one's name's Bela, or Becher, etc. Oh, and he names all the sons. So then Joseph inquired, "Why did you come up with these names?" He replied, "They all have some reference to this brother I had from the same mother, from Rachel, and the troubles that have befallen him. So I called him Bela because he disappeared. I called him Becher because he was the firstborn of our mother. I called my next son Ashbel because he sent him." In other words, all 10 of his sons, he gave names that referred to Joseph, his brother who he lost. And that, according to Rashi, is what caused Joseph to start crying. Now, when he cries, there is a verse here that everybody loves. All the rabbis, everybody loves this verse. Let's see if I think it's verse 30. So if you'll skip with me to verse 30. Chapter 43, same chapter, verse 30. Oh wait, that's not it. This is the one we just looked at the comments on where he starts weeping. That we just looked at that. There's one more verse. I'm sorry. Back to Vayigash, chapter 45, verse 14. This is the verse that everybody loves because there's a problem with the Hebrew. Ed, you saw this coming? All right. Okay, right. So I think we could all agree that in Hebrew, or that in English, neck is singular. Eyes are plural, ears are plural, hands are plural, feet are plural. We have one neck. Okay? So if I would say something, right, so if I would say, he spoke it in Benjamin's ears. Okay, you'd expect ears to be plural, because we have more than one. Now, unless you're, Van Gogh post. But
not everybody gets it.
I mean,
Stories.
yeah. All right, this is bonus. That's bonus. But neck, we could all agree is singular. So we could all, I think, agree, and the rabbis have a great issue with this, that if he says he cried on his necks, plural, that's a funny thing to say. Because we all generally agree we have one neck. Well, what the Torah does is use neck plural. Now, a neck in Hebrew is a tzva'ar. It's a hard word to say, tzva'ar. But if you look in verse 14 of chapter 45, it says in English, "Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and he wept." So notice he's crying again. Joseph cries a lot. right? And Benjamin also was weeping on his neck. Now, the English says neck. Now, this is a great example of why yesterday was a fast day. You know, yesterday was a fast day. It was great because this morning I lost a pound, which is, and I had eaten a lot earlier in the week. So it was like, but I had eaten a lot in the week knowing that the fast day was coming. And as usual, I broke even, which was my goal. So, but one of the reasons it was a fast, there are 3 reasons why yesterday was a fast day. It's called the 10th of Tevet. The first reason is that was the day that the Babylonians breached the outer walls of Jerusalem when they came 2 years before they actually destroyed the first temple. The second reason is the Yortzeit of Ezra. But the third reason is the day of the publication of the Septuagint, the day in which the Bible was, or the Tanakh, the Torah, was translated into Greek. Now, why would that be something to be upset about? Because once you start reading the Torah in a different language besides Hebrew, you miss some things and you limit yourselves. And one of the things you'd limit yourself to do, there's a perfect example of it, is in English it says he kissed him on his neck. Because if you wrote kissed on his neck in plural, kissed on his necks, someone would say this is written wrong, it makes no sense. But in Hebrew we can't change that because you can't change the Hebrew. So what do you have to do? You have to try to figure out and ask yourself the question, why is there something that seems grammatically incorrect, and then deal with it? But once you translate it, you lose the nuance. So that was one of the reasons that on Jewish tradition yesterday was a fast day. So if you look, the Talmud explains it. So if you look, because in Hebrew it says sa'arav, it's Svarei binyaman. So listen closely. Svar would be neck, but there's a yud at the end of that word. It says Svarei. And that A, when you put that A before another noun, it's called smichut, that makes it plural. And so what it says there is not the neck of Benjamin, it says the necks, plural, of Benjamin. Why wouldn't it be Svarei? Because that's one of the rules of smichut. When you put 2 nouns together, you drop the mem. Which is interesting that you bring that up, because when I went to rabbinic school, you have to take a Hebrew test. And I forgot the laws. I forgot the laws of smichut. My Hebrew was probably better than almost anyone in my class going into my first year in Jerusalem. But because I forgot those laws of smichut, I did terrible on that section of the test, and they put me in Kita Gimel. The best was Kita Hey. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. They put me in Kita Gimel. I should have been in Kita Hey. So I complained. And then it turned out, well, Kita Gimel is really easy. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. So, but I did complain. I should have been in Kita Hey. I still, well, I'm over it. Okay. No, because you know what happens is you get stereotyped in rabbinic school for the rest of the 5 years. Kita Gimel. It's not that good. And I'm like, my Hebrew's better than yours. I just forgot the smichut. To this day, I see rabbis I haven't seen in 30 years. Oh, yeah, you were in Kita Gimel. I was in Kita Hey.
When they interviewed you here, they asked.
Yeah.
Is that why you like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So their Hebrew is the level of a kindergartner, but they tell me they're in Kita Hey. Okay, whatever. So here's what the Gemara says. Bavli Megillah 16b. The Gemara elaborates on certain elements in the story of Joseph and his brothers. The verse states with regard to Joseph, and he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck, and there you see it says, instead of Svar, it's Svarei, and wept. The wording of the verse gives rise to a question, as the word Svarei is plural, meaning necks. How many necks did Benjamin have? Maybe he's one of those guys from the bar scene of Star Wars, who knows? Such that the verse should use the plural Svarei rather than the singular Savar. Rabbi Elazar said, this intimates that Joseph cried over the 2 temples that were destined to be in the tribal territory of Benjamin and were destined to be destroyed. The same verse continues, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He cried over the tabernacle of Shiloh that was destined to be in the tribal territory of Joseph and was destined to be destroyed. Okay. This is amazing stuff. So let me try to sum up in a couple of minutes what just happened. Joseph and Benjamin start crying on each other's necks. And he doesn't see on Benjamin, he sees on Benjamin's neck 2 things, not one thing. On one side he sees, so you have to understand, there were 12 tribes, right? There were 12 tribes that were really 13 tribes, because the tribe of Joseph gets divided up between his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they each become 1. So now there's 13 tribes. Clear so far? 10 of those tribes settle in what became the northern kingdom when the kingdom split after King Solomon died. The northern kingdom was called Israel. 10 of the tribes lived there. 3 of them, remember there's 13, 3 of them lived in the south. Okay. In 723 BCE, the Assyrians conquered the north, and those 10 tribes were lost. They became known as the 10 lost tribes. And they assimilated into Assyrian society, never saw them again, they're gone. Until maybe the Ethiopian Jews, maybe the tribe of Dan or whatever, but they were gone. So the 10 tribes of the north were gone. The only 3 tribes left were in the south. Who were they? Judah, who we pretty much all come from, that's why we're called Jews, because they were by far the biggest. And then 2 other tribes that melded into the Judean Empire. The southern part of Israel was called Judah. And who's there? Levi, because they were working in the Holy Temple, which is in the south in Jerusalem, and Benjamin. So when Joseph looks at Benjamin, if he's looking into the future, what he sees is, my progeny are going to be in the north, and before the Holy Temple was built, there were a couple of different places where they put the Ark of the Covenant and people would go there to worship. One of them was Shiloh. And so for a time, up in Samaria, in the northern part, where Joseph was, where Ephraim, his son Ephraim was, the ark was there, but that area would be destroyed. So when Benjamin looks at Joseph, he's crying because he has this vision that Joseph's future kingdom in Shiloh is going to be destroyed. But when Joseph looks at Benjamin, he sees that the holy temples are going to be in your territory, Jerusalem, because Benjamin was one of the only tribes given the south. And both temples, meaning one side of the neck and the other side of the neck, 2 necks, both temples were going to be destroyed. Now, this is what I was saying at the beginning. If you believe that this part of the Torah was written much later and was written in the time after the first temple was destroyed, then you're not really writing about a prediction. You're writing about you're playing back what's happening in your life into the text. Does that make sense? If you believe that the second temple, right? Because even if you're a JEPD person, you believe that that most of the Bible would have been written, about between 700 and 500 years before 0. So way, way before the second temple was destroyed. But if you believe that God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, then what's happening here, according to the Talmud, is that Joseph and Benjamin are crying over their future prophecy of the destruction of the Jewish people in the land of Egypt. In the land of Israel. Now, I want to just try to tie a couple of things together and then make a point. The story of Joseph in Egypt is a story of the galut. It's a story of the diaspora. It's a story of Jews living and developing, I talked about this last night, developing a community, Jewish centers, preparing for the future outside of the land of Israel. And trying to figure out how we're going to survive until we can go back. And it's going to be another several hundred years before they can go back. So we need to set up all the institutions and be ready here so that we can continue our traditions. It's a story of diaspora, and Jacob's not happy about it. All right. Now, when Joseph is dealing with Simon, he says, "You're the one who threw me into the pit." And the brothers are saying, "Yeah, he's the one. He led Levi to kill all the people at Shechem, and he's the one whose idea it was to sell Joseph into slavery, and we have problems with him." And that's we're not focused on that so much. What we're really focused on is the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And so look what Benjamin and Joseph are crying about. Nobody's crying about Simon. What they're crying about in the diaspora is what's going on in Israel. The relationship to what's going to happen. You're going to lose Shiloh. Well, you're going to lose the first temple, and you're going to lose the second temple. But their focus living in the diaspora, all the while they're getting comfortable, they're setting up institutions. Jacob's telling Judah to set up yeshivas and Jewish community centers and hubs and stuff like that. I used that joke last night too. Also twice it didn't go over great. I'll keep doing it though. But set up all that stuff while you're in the diaspora so that we can be here for a long time. All the while, never taking your mind off where we're supposed to be in an ideal world and what's going on over there, because that's really, really important. And so this story, I think, of the Galut, this diaspora story of Joseph, is ultimately a reminder of two things. One, as Jews, you can survive in the diaspora. And even more so, if like the reason Jacob tells Judah, set up all these institutions, if you go out in the diaspora and you set up Jewish institutions and you invest in them and you connect to your Judaism there, God says, not only can you survive there, but I'll go with you. Right? So when we put the Torah here, God is here. Right? We can make holy places here. We don't have to be in Israel to have holy places. That's point one. Point two is that all the while that we're doing that, you can't take your mind off the importance of the Jewish community in Israel, and that ultimately the ideal is what we say at the end of the Passover Seder. So at the end of the Passover Seder, we're in the same mindset. Right? During the whole Passover Seder, the experience is in Egypt. But the whole mindset is the same as Jacob and Joseph. We're in Egypt. And it's fine. We'll set up our institutions. But it's not the ideal. The ideal is, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year we're going to go back to Israel. So King David wrote about this. And it's in the psalm. If you look at the last song, why is Joseph always crying? So we started the class by trying to point out, why is it that Joseph always has tears? And King David comments on this when he writes the psalm. So in Psalm 126, verse 5, he says the famous line. There's a beautiful song right there. Those who sow. You know that one? It's really beautiful. Sounds better when the cantor does it, but that's how it goes. Those who sow in tears shall reap with songs of joy. Okay? So what King David meant by that is, King David was on the run for a lot of his life, trying to get to Jerusalem, which he ultimately did at the end of his life and build Jerusalem, but it took him a long time to get there. If you have tears while you're in the diaspora for the unbuilt home of the Jewish people or the unfinalized home, or even for the distress of the Jews who are living in Israel while you're not there, then ultimately you'll reap in joy. So I think that we're comfortable here. I think that we're more comfortable than we think, even though despite the rise of anti-Semitism, we're going to continue to be strong and continue to endure in this country. There are other countries I'm not so sure about, but in America we will. But so long as we are, we have to remember that our fate and our success is in every way bound up with the bond of what's happening with our brothers and sisters in Israel. And just like Jacob and Joseph and Benjamin, we can be in the diaspora, but we have to, our tears ultimately are for the joy of our people in Israel, which is a great thing to think about as this war hopefully will come to an end with victory very soon. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
You know, there's something else in the left.
What's that?
One day you'll prosper the diaspora. There'll come a pharaoh who doesn't know you.
Yeah, that's true.
There, and that is the stark lesson.
Well, that's every country. That's every country. The question is America different or not?
Was Germany different?
But Germany is no America. America's different.
Then it was.
Not like America.
No.
Not like America.
This is a new land. That's the same old land where drums came forth.
What? The Jews were very prominent in World War I.
Served in the military.
And served with honor in the military.
People still hated them.
Yep.
And they hate us here.
We'll see.
Some.
Well, some for sure.
Some.
Not like Germany.
Your joke about the hub, I loved it. Sometimes it falls flat, but I wanted to share with you. You're a great company. No, I'm going to give it to you. You're using this. I was reading a story about Neil Armstrong.
Okay.
And Neil Armstrong said, pick a lunch. And he's talking about the moon. And he tells a joke, and there's no response. He goes, well, I guess you have to. Okay?
That's good.
You're in good company.
Yeah. Like I said, my humor is mostly for me. Yeah, I entertain myself. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it's a bonus.
If I'm entertaining myself, it's worth it. That's a good line, though. Yeah.
And I knew that rule about
Food? Reliance. Yeah. Because when the two nouns come together, they rely on each other, and the rules come together. No, it's with a summon. When they smoke, they rely on it. Trust him. Like Samokalai.